TCI Lesson 9, Section 4, Probability and the Inheritance of Alleles. If you have a sibling born from the same biological parents, do you have the same traits? No, you probably look and behave very differently. But if you both inherit one copy of every chromosome from each parent, why are you not identical? You are not identical to your siblings because you inherited a different combination of alleles from each of your parents than they did. Well, how did this happen? Since following the inheritance of 46 different chromosomes is a lot to keep track of, the example in figure 4a follows only the inheritance of chromosome number 1. So let's take a look at this over here. Make it a little bit bigger. All right, here we go. All right, mother, father, offspring. Okay. All pairs of chromosomes follow the same pattern. Each of the mother's eggs and the father's sperm carries one copy of chromosome 1. Half of the mom's eggs randomly got the first copy of chromosome 1, that's the dark purple, and the other half got the second copy of chromosome 1, shown as the light purple. Okay? The same was true for the dad's sperm, shown as the dark and light red. Figure 4a. There are 4 possible combinations of chromosome pairs that the offspring could inherit. He was equally likely to inherit any one of these 4 possible chromosomes. In other words, he has an equal chance of inheriting the dark purple chromosome from his mom and the dark red chromosome from his dad as inheriting the light purple and the light red, 1 and 4. This means that you might have gotten a combination 1 while your sibling got combination 2, so you inherited different alleles. The chance that a specific outcome will occur each time an event happens is called a probability. A common example of probability is a coin toss. There are 2 outcomes in a coin toss, heads and tails. Each outcome has an equal chance of occurring. In this case, the probability of a toss resulting in heads can be expressed as the fraction 1 over 2 or 1/2 or the percentage 50%. This number comes from the idea that if you flip the coin 100 times, about 50 of these times you would get heads and about 50 of these times you would get tails. This means that you would get heads 50 times out of a total of 100 flips, or 50 out of 100. 50 out of 100 can also be written as 1 over 2 because 50 is half of 100 and 1 is half of 2. How does this knowledge of probability apply to the inheritance of chromosomes? Suppose the mother and father in the model had a second child. What combination of chromosomes 1 might this offspring inherit? The same 4 outcomes are possible and are equally likely to occur. Each child has a 1 in 4 chance of inheriting any one of the 4 combinations as shown in figure 4b. A 1 in 4 chance can also be written as 1 over 4 or as 25%. No matter how many children these parents have, each child has the same chance of inheriting a particular pair of chromosomes. Pretty cool. Move up here to picture 4b. All right. Figure 4b. The probability of inheriting each of the 4 combinations of chromosomes can be expressed as a fraction or a percent. An offspring will inherit one of these 4 pairs of chromosomes, 1 chromosome from each parent. All combinations are equally likely. So here they are right here. This is chromosome number 1, and this is one possible combination. Here's one possible combination. Here's one possible combination. Here's one possible combination. Different combination of traits can arise in offspring in part because each chromosome is inherited independently. Remember that the model shown here illustrates only one of the 23 chromosome pairs that humans have, but the inheritance of every pair follows the same probability. This helps to explain how siblings can have different combination of traits from one another. For example, a mother with curly red hair and dimples and a father with with straight brown hair and no dimples might have one child with curly red hair and no dimples and another child with curly brown hair and dimples. Section 5, Mendel and inheritance. What do you have in common with a pea plant? Probably more than you might guess. Gregor Mendel, a monk who lived in what is now the Czech Republic during the 1800s, was the first person to study the inheritance using math. His use of probability to explain why traits are inherited in a certain pattern led to the development of the modern theory of genetic inheritance. This is because what he found in pea plants turned out to be true for genes in other organisms, including humans. Mendel studied the inheritance of traits such as flower color, seed color, and plant height in pea plants. He studied one trait at a time over many generations of pea plants and collected detailed data. Mendel used true breeding, tall and short plants in his research. True breeding means that the tall plants had always produced only tall offspring when they were bred together, and the short plants had always produced only short offspring when they were bred together. Figure 5a. Move this down. Pea plant inheritance. Gregor Mendel was the first scientist to apply probability to the study of inheritance. He bred pea plants and followed their traits over multiple generations of breeding. He found that there are patterns of inheritance in certain traits, like tallness. When Mendel bred a true breeding tall plant to a true breeding short plant, he found something strange. He found that all the offspring were tall, not medium, nor were some of them tall and others short. The trait for short seemed to have disappeared in this first generation. Next, Mendel bred two of these tall offspring to each other. He expected that all the offspring in the second generation be tall like their parents. But he found instead that 75% were tall and 25% were short, so it went from being tall to tall to tall to short. The short trait had reappeared in the second generation. Mendel's findings are illustrated in figure 5a. So here we go. So when we went tall to short, we got all tall. Now, but those have some other alleles and then when we bred these together, we got two tall, but we also got a tall and a short. Interesting. Mendel did not know about genes, but he concluded there must have been some factors that are passed on from parent to offspring. He thought that there was one factor that controlled tallness and another factor that controlled shortness, but somehow the factor that controlled tallness could not hide or overcome the factor that controlled shortness. Well, we now know that Mendel's factors were alleles found on chromosomes. Each pea plant had inherited two alleles, one from each plant. The tall parent plant had two alleles for tallness, and the short parent plant had two alleles for shortness. The plants of the first generation all inherited one allele for tallness from the tall parent and one allele for shortness from the short parent. Okay, yeah, sure. But why were the short alleles hidden? Mendel had discovered that some alleles are dominant and others are called recessive. A dominant allele is one that is expressed even if only one copy is present. The alleles for tallness was dominant. A recessive allele is one that is expressed only when two copies are present. The allele for shortness was recessive. Recessive can be carried from one generation to the next, even if they aren't expressed. This can seem to reappear by being expressed in a later generation. So even though the first generation had an allele for shortness, the plants were not short because the dominant tall allele overshadowed that trait. Why does the recessive shortness trait come back in the second generation? In the second generation, some plants inherited only the alleles for shortness randomly from each parent. Without having any of the dominant tallness alleles, the plant will be short. There you go. Dominant and recessive alleles are also important for human traits like eye color. Using the eye color gene, OCA2, that we talked about before as an example, the B allele of OCA2 is dominant And a person who inherits two B alleles, B, big B, will make a lot of melanin and have brown eyes. The little b allele is recessive, and a person who inherits two alleles, little b, has blue eyes. A person with one B, capital B allele and one with lowercase b of the OCA2 gene will make melanin and have darker eyes. The dominant allele masks the recessive allele. So both someone with two big B alleles or one big B allele and one small allele, big B, little b, will have brown eyes. Only a person who inherits a B allele from each parent, little b, will have blue eyes. Figure 5b illustrates one version of OCA2 allele inheritance for this family. There we go. This example is actually a simplified version of reality because many genes contribute to eye color and not all work the same way. The actual inheritance of eye color is much more complex. Scientists continue to find new genes that are involved in determining eye color. Part 6, using Punnett squares. Here we go. We'll get it up here. We'll make it big. Sorry, I know this is getting long. Mendel discovered that offspring inherit certain traits in a predictable pattern. How can you use these patterns to predict traits of any male and female's potential future offspring? A Punnett square is a diagram that shows the potential allele combination as an offspring could inherit from its parents. Like all models, a Punnett square can both explain past observations and predict future observations. It explains the pattern of inheritance in terms of cause and effect that Mendel observed in his pea plants and can be Mendel observed in his pea plants and can be used to predict the probability of offspring inheriting certain alleles from their parents. Figure 6, that's the one we're looking at. Using a Punnett square, you can predict the probability of inheriting different combination of alleles from two parents. If an offspring acquires even one copy of a dominant allele, the offspring will express that dominant trait. But it requires two copies of the recessive alleles for the recessive trait to be expressed. The only thing that is necessary to use a Punnett square is to know each parent's alleles for a particular gene. You can predict which alleles the offspring can inherit. You can also predict an offspring's traits based on the alleles. Figure 6 is an example of a Punnett square. In this example, both parents have one dominant allele, big D, and one recessive allele, little d, of a gene represented by capital D, little d. One parent's alleles are written at the top of the square and the other parent alleles are on the side. Each of the four boxes show one of the four possible ways the parent's alleles can combine. For example, one possible combination is for the offspring to inherit one dominant allele from each parent. That's a 1/4 chance that the offspring will inherit the combination and end up with DD, capital D, big D, big D. Inheriting big D means this offspring will express the dominant trait. There are 3 other possible combinations of inherited alleles. This does not mean that the parents will have 4 offspring or that each offspring will have a different combination. Each offspring has an equal chance of inheriting one of these combinations. You cannot know for sure what an offspring will inherit, but by using a Punnett square, you can also predict the chance.